All right. So thank you everyone for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. Obviously, I have to teach myself how to turn on video audio, I guess. I don't know. So my name is John Bristow. I'm the Community Director for Octopus Deploy. Thank you again for your patience. I am joined here today. We are joined here today. We're very fortunate to have Jeffrey Palermo of Clear Measure to talk to all of us about database deployments with Octopus Deploy. So we're going to be talking about database deployments. This might be something that you haven't really considered when it comes to deployments. And so in this session, Jeffrey and I will be talking about how you go about doing this, and in particular, how you go about doing it with a technology like SQL Server or with Octopus, for example. There are a variety of ways in which you can do this. We are utilizing SQL Server and a technology called Flyway in this example here, but as we know, there are many databases out there. And so we are providing that as a template for how to apply those concepts, but throughout this session, we'll be talking about all of those things. So if you haven't used Session before, this is the environment where we host our webinars. If you want, you can submit your questions to the Q&A pane. You can also let us know where you're joining in from using the chat window. Let us know where you're joining in from. I'm from Australia. Jeffrey's in the United States. So let us know if you're all up late or up early as it is. And with that, we'll go ahead and kick things off. So as I said before, this is our environment. You can use this for a wide variety of features. You can let us know also through emojis, which things you like as well. We do take the time to curate these webinars, so we will do a post-production of this and then post it to our YouTube channel. You'll find our YouTube channel searching for Octopus Deploy. Let us know if you are unable to get the video there, but you can subscribe and get notifications of that. You can also, if you so wish, let us know through our Slack channel, which is our community Slack. You'll find us at octopus.com/community, and you'll be able to join our Slack channel there. There's a wide variety of folks who are utilizing Octopus, asking questions, getting advice, sharing links, sharing tips and tricks, all that sort of stuff. So please feel free to join the community up on Slack and get connected with some other folks who are using Octopus as part of their deployments. And then finally, if you so choose, go ahead and make octopus.com your homepage. If not, a bookmark, download a trial. We have a contact us form on our page there, so let us know how we can help. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Jeffrey, why don't you take a moment and let us know a little bit about your company and Clear Measure.
Sure. Thanks, John. And making sure we can see the slides okay. All the technical stuff's
You're great.
good? Okay.
You're much better than I am.
Well, I had to jump back in too. So Clear Measure is a US-based Octopus Deploy consulting partner. And I think we've been using the product since the open source days, 9-something years ago. And it's just grown, and we've grown with it. And we specialize in .NET and Azure services. We're a full service software architecture and engineering firm. And through the projects that we do with our clients, we really enjoy empowering our client software delivery capabilities. So even after the project that we do for our client, there is just a more world-class DevOps capability that we leave it with. So the themes that we focus on are quality, stability, and increasing the speed of software delivery. And we focus deeply on the Microsoft stack. And so if you're thinking about using Octopus, or if you started and you're thinking, oh, you know what, maybe we should use it a different way, or maybe we need some help getting started, we love doing that. And we've got lots of reference implementations and templates, and can get people jump started pretty quick. And here's a quote from the CEO and founder of Octopus Deploy. And we did a joint webinar a number of years ago on database deployments with Paul while he was still doing a lot of the marketing developer relations. And that's actually, the recording of that is still available on octopus.com. So that's kind of fun. All right. And so I'll just roll into this. Before we start doing demos and solutions, I want to talk a little bit about the challenge that we have and why we even need a solution to this. It used to be that everyone would manually deploy database changes. And there's still a lot of companies today that have adopted some automation, but only for the compute side of their architecture, only for the application, for the screens, for the web application, for the Windows or WinForms and WPF and even mobile applications and the web APIs that serve mobile applications. But if you want to not have these stressful deployment windows or outage windows on late on a Friday night and get back a lot of your time and increase the likelihood that things are going to go smoothly, you don't want exceptions during a deployment process, then you really have to automate everything that is a part of your system architecture, not just everything in the database. But databases are different. And so we have to treat them a different way. And ultimately, without automation in managing the database, developing, testing the changes, deploying, operating and monitoring, without automation in that space, then your cycle time for changing the database is going to be months and weeks, whereas you really need it to keep pace with the rest of the application architecture, and you need to be able to change things about your database in minutes. You need to be able to change them every day, multiple times a day if necessary, and not have it be a big deal. And so we're going to talk about how that's even possible, because some of these techniques were kind of figured out and shared around the industry probably going on 18 years ago. In 2005, there were conferences kind of people discussing how to do database migrations, and we'll talk about that. But the problem is has a few elements. The database schema has varying versions sometimes between environments. It can be hard to get started, and things that are going to stand in your way is if through the manual changes, your production database is just a little bit different than a staging database or a UAT environment or a test environment. And it's easy to get that way because maybe there's some user accounts or some stored procedures or some functions or things additional to the database schema that have changed over time. And if a human is manually adding a new column or is expanding a single column, simple change, but if it's not done exactly the same way, then you have these little variations. And where you have variability in your environments, then you have bugs that are hard to diagnose and get to the root cause of. And another thing that can hold you back is by not including your database deployment process in the same DevOps pipeline as your application. Okay. And really the root cause of it is that the development environment, even before you get to deployment, your development environment is incomplete if it doesn't include everything about building and validating the database schema with the ability of automatically creating a new database schema on a developer's workstation. Then it's incomplete. And when it's in that state, you're kind of blocked from going downstream in your DevOps pipeline and handling deployments in an automated way. And then I also want to talk about ambiguous enterprise architecture. A lot of times when applications grow up over time, they will start to acquire connection strings. If you go into the config section, you'll see that an application knows about half a dozen or a dozen databases across the company because for a particular screen, we needed some data from some other system. And so what did we do? We just got a connection string, and now we're tapping into a database of a different system that we don't even own, we don't even control from an architecture perspective. And so when you have that mesh, when it's not clear as to what application architecturally owns the data store, then those are some things you have to untangle if you're going to be really successful with automated database deployment. So those are some things to think about. But there's a quip many years ago, 2019 is this tweet, and the tweet is, applications with no database in the real world 0%, and articles on development patterns, 100%. And I would include online examples, online demos. There's tons of DevOps products and cloud demos and documentation that talk about automate this, automate that. And what is it? It's a dinky little website with no database whatsoever. In the real world, that doesn't happen. We always have data. Okay. Always have data. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the concepts. I want to blaze through here to get to a quick demo, but when we're talking about a database, there's a few things that we're talking about. We're certainly talking about the schema itself, and that is the structure of the data, which is tables and views and store procedures. Those things are part of the schema. Okay. Another element is the schema data. Okay. We can create the structure of a database and store procedures, views, tables, but let's say that there's a table of listing the regions served in the countries served. Well, that doesn't change very often, and so you may choose to have it housed with your schema. Or if you want to data drive some options and you have like yes, no, maybe in some drop down, or if you're if you're in the medical space and just simple things like, oh, are we dealing with male or female, and you want that data, that is schema data. And for a lot of times it's perfectly appropriate to store that data in the schema because it just doesn't change. And if it were to change at some point, like if we served an additional region or an additional country, okay, that's so rare that it would be perfectly fine just to do a deployment and add another record in the database. So you're always going to have schema data, and you could think of that as seldom changed configuration that you choose to house in the database instead of housing in a configuration file. Because from an architecture perspective, you could also source the options in a drop-down list from a config file. That's perfectly fine. People do it all the time. But sometimes you choose some data to just be in the database. And regardless of environment that you deploy to, that schema data is going to be the same. Okay. As opposed to configuration data and administrative data, which likely is going to be different per environment. And then of course, in production, you have user data. So you have those different concepts, but from a technical perspective, when deploying, you can manage them all in the same way. And we'll kind of show those approaches with database migrations. So let me fast forward. I'm going to fast forward through this for anybody who's come to any of our joint webinars on DevOps or read my latest book. You've seen this poster. It's a kind of standard structure and flow of a DevOps pipeline, highlighting .NET and Azure and Octopus Deploy, and even where some of the Redgate tools would fit in if you use those. But if anybody would like a high resolution copy of this DevOps architecture poster, and this is actually only the top third of it, you can just send me an email. We'd be happy to get it to you. All right, let me keep on going here. I'm not going to highlight those. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio in just a second to show you where these go. But in order to be successful with automated deployments, you have to actually have your database scripts in your Git source control repository. Okay, so your source control repository obviously needs your application code. It also needs your database migration scripts, and it needs your migration tool, whatever that happens to be. Okay, and then for automated testing, you're also going to want a small little data set just to facilitate your private build and your integration build, so that you have some data that you can throw into your database to facilitate some automated test scenarios. If you don't have any data, your application typically doesn't do anything interesting. And so you want just a little bit of capability to throw data in your database locally or on your build server to run some automated tests and make sure that happens. So let me kind of show where that is after this slide. The second thing I'm going to highlight is packaging up your database scripts. Everything that Octopus operates on is a package of some sort. And I mean, technically you can get it to do other things, but that's the way it's meant. That's the happy path, is operate on files that are in packages. In the .NET world, we're throwing NuGet packages at it. And one of those NuGet packages needs to be your database schema. Okay. So let me show you Visual Studio. Let me switch over, and John, I want to verify that Visual Studio came up for me.
You're looking great.
Awesome.
This is fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just highlight the Visual Studio solution structure. Okay, hide these script files. One of the now UI.server, anybody who's done Blazor before recognizes, oh, this looks like a Blazor application. Well, yes, it is. It's the dinkiest of small of Blazor WebAssembly applications on top of Azure SQL. And this is a part of a larger demo that we've done some other webinars on that use Azure Container Apps and Azure SQL, but it's a regular .NET application. One of the projects is just called database. This is not really a .NET project. It's not even a SQL, a database project. It's just a class library. It's a holder for some files, and one of the directories in there is update. And so this is the simplest as it gets. And this first script, well, that's just a diagnostic script. The second script creates a table, okay? And this directory is going to hold SQL files that all make an independent change to the database. And John's going to go into more detail, but I could have a script that does an alter table add column. And we typically put a number in front of the file so that when we sort alphabetically, it's deterministic what order they run in. And if you think about it, regardless of what the structure of your database is, that simple pattern is going to be able to handle it. Whether you're adding a store procedure, whether you're making a change, it literally doesn't matter. Anything that you can execute some SQL against a database, you put it in there. And then the tool that this application happens to use is AliasQL. Architecturally, it works the same as the DBUp tool, as Roundhouse. And then there's another file in here, update Azure SQL.ps1. This is going to be used downstream in the deployment by Octopus Deploy to actually execute the chosen tool that we use to run this against an arbitrary database. So you see here, we've actually curated a script and put it in source control that knows how to grab variables from Octopus Deploy and then run the tool that we have chosen for this particular application and pass in, if we're recreating the database or if we're updating the database, that's the action create or update. And in a build server, we would say recreate. And then where is the database server? What's the name? And then this, of course, is the path to where we find the directories. And then what database user and database password. Okay. So this, putting a script right here in source control and then packaging this up in a NuGet package enables your deployments in Octopus Deploy to be standardized across any number of applications that you might have, because you have dozens and dozens and dozens of applications, and you can have literally the same process in Octopus for all of those, where you grab the database package, run a PowerShell script file, passing in where the database is based on variables, and you're done. And every individual applications, the application developers can have the variability where some applications might use a slightly different tool and handle it a different way, as long as you've agreed across your organization that, hey, we're going to have a PowerShell script inside the package, and that's what Octopus is going to do. Now, Octopus, you can put all kinds of script directly in the tool, but the power is when you just call a file and let the application have it. Now, I'm going to switch over and just show Team City real quick. So let me go here. All right, this is Team City Cloud, where we have it built. I'm not going to show you all of building. But if I go, and I've actually exploded this out, if I go to the integration build, which this was a successful build, and then I go to artifacts, I see the UI, which is the Blazor.NET application. And then I see database. That's another one, database. I can open it up and it's not complicated. The scripts folder is right there. There's my tool. And then update. And there it is. There's the script. So we're packaging it up, ready to be tossed over to Octopus Deploy. And Octopus is super happy when we do that. So let me go back here. And I even had a screenshot there. Okay. Now, why don't we switch over, John, to your demo, and
Sure.
stop sharing so you can share.
Awesome. Yeah, so as Jeffrey was highlighting there, obviously there's lots of ways in which you can, and that's Hall of Mirrors again. There's lots of ways in which you can demonstrate this. Everything that I'm about to show you has actually already been done in a previous video that we have up on our YouTube channel called Streamlined Database Deployments with Flyway and Octopus Deploy. And in that, Bob Walker, who's a member of our team at Octopus, went through a lot of the things that I'm about to show you here. So if you want to deep dive into how Flyway works and how you can use it in concert with Octopus Deploy, I would encourage you to check that out there. The tool that we'll be looking at for this is a tool called Flyway. Now, Flyway is an open source tool that was procured or purchased by Redgate and is maintained by them. It's a tool that allows you to basically create, it is a tool that allows you to manage your database migrations, for example. It supports up to 20 databases, and they have a rich client that will run within an environment like, say, macOS, like this. But you can also utilize their CLI, and that's what we'll be using as part of a deployment process. So as Jeffrey was mentioning before, one of the things that you need to make sure that you're aware of is that as you're migrating from, say, one schema to the next, it's important that those migration scripts are maintained. The best place for that to live is, of course, in source control. So for that, we're going to underpin this with Git. And GitHub is going to be basically our home of choice, but you can use anything that's Git-based. Flyway is a tool that allows you to basically establish a local, basically a local version of your database that is reflective of, say, your development, test, and production databases. In addition to that, it will track changes over time, compare state, and then allow you to generate automatically migrations. So migration scripts are really important because not only do they need to be versioned, but you also have to have a capacity to roll them back. So one of the nice things about a tool like Flyway is its ability to generate rollback scripts as well. So as you're utilizing a tool like this, be aware that a tool like this is really, really nice in terms of helping you do these migrations. And so as you're utilizing something to complement your schema, for example, through migrations, it will allow you to do so. And so this tool provides a wonderful set of capabilities. It integrates directly with source control, allows you to generate these, will track your schema changes, and then generate the scripts necessary for making those part of the deployment process. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be utilizing a GitHub for this, but you can use any Git-based repository, obviously. So you can see we have a variety of files that have been generated as part of this. We're maintaining our schema through this. And if we take a look at our GitHub repository, you'll notice that in here we're utilizing GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions is, similar to Jeffrey's demo using TeamCity. It's basically a workflow model for generating, builds and generating artifacts or packages that we will push to Octopus Deploy. So as you can see here, the trigger for this is any changes that I make to a particular branch. If I wish, I can also invoke this directly through a button. This is the workflow dispatch event handler. Down here, you'll notice that we're doing a bunch of things, but as part of this, we're utilizing some of our GitHub actions for Octopus Deploy, namely things like push package, create release, push build info, and so forth. So this is the tie-in to your source control. So as you're checking in changes to this, and you're making changes potentially to your database through its schema, and you're utilizing a tool like Flyway, those changes will then get propagated down from GitHub into Octopus. So let's switch now over to Octopus and take a look at what this looks like. So this is a previous run. Obviously, these runs can take a little bit of time, so we've kind of shortened the cycle here by preventing the Julia Child's here's one I created earlier type effect. So this is the run of a deployment process that has occurred due to changes that have been generated through a schema migration. So in this case here, we may complement a table with an additional column, for example, and we're going to execute those as part of a deployment process. One of the nice things that a tool like Flyway provides is the ability to track these changes and generate a report, for example. So if I take a look at, excuse me, one of these changes, this is the report that a tool like Flyway will generate. Will allow you to see changes that occurred across a variety of different objects within your schema. You can generate drift reports, migrations reports, etc. if they're available. But generally, this is the report that's generated for a human to read. But you can certainly integrate with this as part of a deployment process, which we'll take a look at in a second. But I just wanted to highlight this here as some of the capabilities available for you as a DBA, if you're a DBA or your DBA on your team. So you can see here we have a deployment process that's executed. As part of this process, this is basically a set of changes that have occurred on a database, and you can see some of the things that have propagated through. So we have build information coming through. We have a set of artifacts, and we have our task runs as they've occurred in the past. If we take a look at the deployment process in particular, you can see that we're utilizing a number of steps here for this process. So I want to draw your attention to step 3 here, which has integration with Flyway itself. So we actually have an integration with Flyway through our Octopus Deploy library. So if you utilize any of the community step templates, you'll see these at library.octopus.com. We actually have integration directly with Flyway, and you can utilize this for executing a number of different migrations as part of this process. This is how it's exposed to the UI in Octopus. And so you can see here, there's a bunch of settings that we can execute as part of this. Now, Flyway has a number of commands, and these are driven through the CLI. You can do migrations, you can check for drift, you can do dry runs, you can do validations. I would not recommend running clean against a production database, obviously. That is if you want to start from scratch. But these and other operations are exposed to you through the integration that we have through our step template. And you can run these as part of a deployment process. And so in this example here, as in step 3, I'm checking changes. I'm validating whether or not I actually have any differences between the applied migration scripts on the target database and the pending migration scripts, the set of instructions that I want to run. And so that will be a report that's generated as part of this. You'll notice that we're utilizing a variety of variables here as part of this process, which is a feature of Octopus as well. And then if we look further down the list of operations here, you can see we're doing things like notifying DBAs of pending changes, doing a review through a manual intervention. These are important steps as part of a migration story. So obviously you want to make sure like, hey, we've got a change here. Is this okay for us to do? And the nice thing about this is because oftentimes you'll do these deployments at like 5 p.m. on a Friday, and having these installed and instituted by a tool like Octopus will force or compel DBAs to make sure that they're checking these migrations. Further down the chain, we'll go ahead and take a look at, hey, let's go ahead and implement these changes as part of a deployment. Here, I'm leveraging the Flyway integration, and I'm actually executing the migrate command here. This is the command that will actually migrate the schema to the latest changes or to the latest version. We then, if we wish, we can check for drift. This is basically a check after the fact to see whether or not actually the changes they've been successfully processed, and so we can validate that that's occurred. And then you'll see that we actually go ahead and deploy the website after the fact. That's often what you'll typically see in a migration, is that it's always changes to the database first, then the application as a follow-up, not the reverse. It's never the deploy the application, then migrate the database. And the reason why, as Jeffrey was explaining, is that applications and databases are the crux of everything relative, and so it's a reflection of what's available in the database as the application itself. So you can see here we're utilizing these effectively, and we're utilizing variables as part of this process. And again, this is available as part of our library. You can go and check out the Flyway database migrations extension if you wish, and it will have a variety of commands available there. And so this is how you'll typically fire these things off. You'll do it through a GitHub action or possibly a different process on a different CI server, and you'll make these changes available through a tool. Now, there are a variety of tools out there. We've highlighted here Flyway, but other tools exist, and you can certainly change depending upon your liking. You can change those requirements depending upon what it is you're looking to target. So that's a quick example of what's available for use there. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And there we're out of the Hall of Mirrors. So great. So again, I just wanted to highlight that this is the summary of the video that you can see. Gemma's gone ahead and posted that in our chat window there, which is great. Thanks, Gemma. And that's available to run. Goes into a very deep dive into how Flyway works, et cetera, if you're all interested. So I just wanted to basically sum up the demo by saying that tools like this are great. You want to leverage migration scripts as part of your deployment. They should live in source control. Don't rely on a tool like integrated through SQL Server Management Studio or other tools like that. You want to make sure you're leveraging scripts. You want to have rollback scripts. You want to have migration scripts. You want to migrate these things carefully and as part of a deployment process. So make sure you take advantage of those going forward. So Jeffrey, obviously we've highlighted a lot of stuff here. Your mileage may vary in terms of the tools and processes that you may encounter, but I'm curious to know, do you have any war stories to share as part of your database deployments? I know that personally, it's always a challenge for migrating databases, but I'm curious to know if you've had any challenges that you faced in the past relative to deployment with databases.
I think everybody has war stories. One of the big principles that I think holds true everywhere is never deploy something that hasn't been tested. And that doesn't mean, oh, it's so simple, it should work, don't worry about it. No, it's don't deploy it unless it's been tested. And so that means in order to do this right, we have to have multiple pre-production environments. We have production, and maybe we have an environment that we do some manual testing against, and that's great. But we also need an environment to run automated tests, because there's no way we're going to run enough manual tests to cover everything. And if we're doing an automated database change, then we need to run that over and over again, and we need to run multiple test cases. The only way to really get the coverage is automated. So let me run an example of things that are hard to test on the face of them. And that is scripts that SQL Server may even suggest. You run the database tuning wizard, and it suggests to you, hey, we suggest that you change the clustered index on this particular table, because that tool will do that from time to time.
Yes.
It is so hard to test what's going to happen with the nature of those types of changes. And so this process is really, really good and makes you really, really fast when it's things that are pertinent to how the application operates, adding columns, making some columns bigger, even splitting some columns. But when it comes to other things that are more operational in nature, just the testing burden, recognize the testing burden, and don't just say, oh, it should work, it'll be fine. Because when I was in my 20s, I took down a system because I changed the nature of a clustered index, and guess what? Production was the only database whose table was so big for that we basically consumed all the hard drive space when the temp DB started trying to change that, resort that clustered index.
Yes, that's a very good point. In fact, it's something I just wanted to highlight here, which is the importance of testing. So one thing I just neglected to show was inside our deployment process here, you can leverage different environments. And so you'll notice here that we're notifying DBAs and of changes potentially as part of a process that is only used for example, for staging. This may not be relevant to you if you're just doing deployments to development or to production. So leverage these environments as part of your deployment process, and that helps you basically control that sort of aspect. So that's a very good point. And I've been in that situation myself where you make a change and suddenly CPU spikes to 99% and you're not sure why, or your temp DB table starts to grow exponentially, or hard drive or network contention, lots of changes. These are side effects that you'll typically see, which obviously speaks to monitoring. So make sure you're monitoring things as part of the process. Yeah, obviously migration scripts are important, and you want to make sure that's part of the process for deployment. But you want to make sure that you're following that up with monitoring after the fact. So there's a variety of tools that you can use. We use a variety of tools for monitoring, and yeah, it allows you to track changes. And the changes might be subtle when you do these migrations. They might be like, oh, it's 200 millisecond response time as opposed to 100 response time. 100 millisecond response time. These other changes are subtle, but they can be signals for things that may be going wrong in the back end. And it's often too late when, it's typically on a Friday evening when you discover these things after a deployment. And the whole goal here with these deployments is to ensure that deployments actually occur in a robust and repeatable manner. And obviously, when changing databases, it's often a scary time for a lot of developers. I don't know about you, but I find that making changes to schema does pose some risks, obviously, because you want to make sure that you're not breaking everything.
Yeah, like with anything dangerous, if you or I watch somebody on a high wire balance beam, we think danger, danger, danger. But for those people who've done it a million times over, well, they practiced. They have a process for it. They have, it's like if you do it over and over again, you squeeze the risk out. So
yes.
And as we close out, let's I'll share my screen again. A note on database operations. How this kind of ties in. So when we think about deploying the database or including a database into our automated DevOps environment, there's some new concept if you've never done it before. For an environment where you're just going to run full system tests on, and in this diagram it's called the TDD environment. If you do acceptance test driven development, if you use tools like Selenium or Playwright or otherwise have large scale automated tests that run the full application, for those test environments, you need to use these tools to drop and recreate the database from scratch. It kind of proves that you have the ability to recreate it and that what you recreate actually is faithfully the same and that you've captured it all. For manual test environments, UAT on this diagram, we need the ability to run the new schema changes, but obviously keep all of the test environment that our various manual users have added in there over time. And then from time to time, these manual test environments, we need to refresh them. So, John mentioned all the things you can do with Flyway, and you can clean it, you can reset it back from scratch. And if you couple those capabilities with some robust tools like SQL Clone from Redgate, then you can have really quick automation that resets the database and then reloads a known testing set into that environment. And then, of course, in production, all we ever do is run the new schema changes. And that's on the deployment side. But then you ask, well, what does it mean to operate the database? And how does that tie in with DevOps? And where does Octopus Deploy integrate with the actual production environment? Well, that's where Runbooks is a perfect fit. In this example, you can see we have two Runbooks: scale down infrastructure and scale up infrastructure. I would say for anybody using cloud services where you pay per CPU and per memory and per usage, these are like the ticket to the game. These are the basics. I can't think of an application where you would not want to have at least these runbooks, because you kind of start to learn the cycles of when your applications are the busiest and when the applications are not the busiest. And even with Azure Container Apps and others, where the cloud service can kind of be sniffed and it can be configured to auto scale somewhat, you quickly know when your application is pretty much idle. And there's so many applications that serve users who are in a known set of time zones and they go to sleep at night. So it doesn't make sense for us to have any more infrastructure at night than the absolute minimum. And then when people start working in the morning, okay, let's get it back up to normal. You save a whole bunch of time. Test environments that are in the cloud, you want to scale those down, almost turn them off at night if no development's happening. And so these are basic run books that you want to have. And by the way, before I kind of dive into them, these 3 URLs, which also were put into the chat, includes the Octopus sample that John just showed. So you can see the code for the Flyway example. And then it also shows the full Team City to Octopus deploy to Azure configuration for the entire pipeline. So if you haven't even implemented your first pipeline and you're just getting started, feel free to copy those build scripts, copy the configuration. You can see the .octopus file. You can see the .team city file. Literally use all that to get jump started. But let me go into the Clear Measure Octopus instance, and it's right here. And let's just go scale up. Let's look at how easy it is to configure these runbooks. You go into process, and there's one step: scale up the infrastructure. You come into here. It's super simple. And the script source, this is where the magic is. The script source is a script file inside a package. Just like deploying, it's a package. And what's it going to be? Well, it's going to be package ID churchbulletin.script and then scale infrastructure.ps1. Okay, let's come over to Visual Studio, see where it is. This particular one happens to be here. We package it up and scale infrastructure.ps1. I'm not going to show you all of this file, but we can see we have 2 command lines for Azure, which logs in. And then this application just has a web application and an Azure SQL database, and it's 2 lines of code. The first line of code scales up more CPU and memory for the Azure Container App. The second actually bumps up the service plan for the Azure SQL database, and we're actually bumping it up based on the variable. So if I scroll over to the right, you can see the service objective. Well, that's a new configuration item, S1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And basically it makes the Azure SQL database have more CPU, more RAM, and that's it. And so we can have variables configured for what it means to be at a level that is scaled down middle of the night, and what it means to be scaled up for prime usage. And of course, you learn your application. It's kind of obvious where it needs to be. And so after the deployment, don't forget these basics when it comes to operating your database along with the rest of the applications, and take note of these URLs. Anything to add on that, John?
No, that was great. Thank you very much. So we're cognizant of time. If you have any questions, feel free to pose them in the Q&A pane. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to remind folks that this is obviously one of many sort of webinars that we like to run. You'll find everything at octopus.com/webinars. Next week, we'll be hosting the community town hall, which is basically like an open forum for showing off the latest and greatest. If you've missed one of our previous webinars, you can see them listed there. All of these are published and pre-recorded on, in some cases, to our YouTube channel. And as Gemma has graciously put onto the highlight there, there's the URL. You can check that out. So feel free to take advantage of that. If there are no questions, that's fine. We can go ahead and wrap this up, and I will go ahead and give you 15 minutes back. Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, feel free to hit Jeffrey up. Where can we find you online? You've got the Twitter/X, whatever they're calling it these days, or LinkedIn, etc.
Yeah, I'll put my email address in the chat. So you just send me an email. I love answering questions, yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
And Jeffrey's got a wonderful podcast, the Azure DevOps podcast, and a bunch of other avenues in which you can hear him talk about these things and other things as well. So once again, Jeffrey, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And with that, thank you for attendees, your time and attention joining us here today. We really appreciate it. And we will see you on the next one. Take care.